Hi, it's Kristen Fruget, published author, editor, and former high school English teacher. Welcome to the T-Shirt Teacher. This is episode 2, where we will be diving into the character of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, from Shakespeare's classic play Hamlet, and the character of Coriolanus Snow from Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. We'll begin with the young Coriolanus Snow in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and the events that transpired that set Coriolanus on the trajectory that eventually ends up in his demise much later in the series. But this is the prequel to the Hunger Games books. And in the opening of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, we find a young Coriolanus Snow struggling in the aftermath of his parents' death due to a war and rebellion of the districts. He's also classmates with a boy named Sejanus Plinth. And the Plinths are extremely wealthy. They are actually from the districts, though, and they have bought their way into the capital, and Coriolanus sees that as an illegitimate claim to wealth. He sees them as an adversary to overcome, but also a pawn to be used. And we'll see that throughout the book and his interactions with Sejanus and his interactions with the Plinth family, how he uses them and manipulates them. We get a glimpse at the obsessive nature of Coriolanus Snow early on in the book. The Hunger Games contestants are going to be announced at the school, and he is getting ready. And on page 7, he says, the shirt. His mind could fixate on a problem like that, anything really, and not let go, as if controlling one element of his world would keep him from ruin. It was a bad habit that blinded him to other things that could harm him. A tendency towards obsession was hardwired into his brain, and it would likely be his undoing if he couldn't learn to outsmart it. That is a powerful foreshadowing of the ending of this book, and actually the ending of the entire Hunger Games saga. However, we see Coriolanus is obsessive, and he knows it. He gets a hyper focus and he hones in. And now we'll jump over to Hamlet, and we'll come back to Coriolanus in just a second. So Hamlet, we find that in Denmark, the king has died, and Hamlet is returning to mourn his father. And upon his return, he finds his friend Horatio, and Horatio has been speaking with guards that have been seeing a ghost. And Horatio has also seen the ghost, although he initially reacts to the news of a ghost that looks like the dead king as that's crazy, and then he goes from his initial reaction to demanding the ghost speak to him. Shakespeare's actually quite amusing if you know how to read it correctly, and it was meant to be watched, so that's an entirely different soapbox that I'll get on later. But Horatio is questioned by Hamlet, and Hamlet's wondering why Horatio is in Denmark, and Horatio says, "My lord, I came to see your father's funeral." And Hamlet says, "I prithee, do not mock me, fellow student. I think it was to see my mother's wedding." Horatio says, "Indeed, it followed hard upon," meaning, yeah, she got married really quickly after your dad died. And the mother, Queen Gertrude, has married Claudius, who is Hamlet's uncle, the king's brother. And then Hamlet goes into this dramatic speech about how the funeral meats were still, on the tables whenever they had the wedding. And then he says he thought he saw his father in his mind's eye, and Horatio, who has just seen the ghost but hasn't told Hamlet, is like, "What?" And he's like, "Hold on." The guards bring Horatio and Hamlet to where they have seen the ghost. And then we get a little glimpse into Hamlet's obsessive nature, because upon seeing that ghost, Hamlet says, Act 1, Scene 3, that he says, "If it assumes my noble father's person, I'll speak to it, though hell should gape and bid me hold my peace." So he's like, I don't care what comes, I'm going to talk to my dad's ghost if it comes. And that's a little glimpse into his obsession. And then in this following scene, we see Horatio and the guards trying to stop Hamlet from following the ghost, because Horatio says in Act 1, Scene 4, "What if it tempt you toward the flood, my lord, or the dreadful summit of the cliff?" And he goes on to say all these things. The ghost could be just trying to get him to come jump off a cliff, and he doesn't realize it. It just might appear like his father. Well, Hamlet will have none of it, and we see that Hamlet is not going to let anything get in his way, because he says, "Unhand me, gentlemen, by heaven, I'll make a ghost of him that lets me. I say, away, go on, I'll follow thee." So Hamlet says he's going to kill them if they do not let him follow his father's ghost. And then Horatio says, "He waxes desperate with imagination." The guard, Marcellus, says, "Let's follow, 'tis not fit to obey him." And then Marcellus foreshadows the entire rotten plot. He says, Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And that is a phrase that has been used as a metaphor for political corruption for centuries now. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And jumping back to the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, something is rotten in the capital. And it's snow. But anyway, something rotten is happening, which is also the Hunger Games, and there's plenty of political corruption. And we find that Snow's jealousy of the Plinth family and his thought that they weren't quite worthy of that. It's almost like he thinks that he deserves it more. And it's in a similar way to Hamlet in thinking that he deserves the throne, which in Hamlet he actually does. Like, he's a legitimate heir to the throne. He has been usurped, essentially, and by his uncle nonetheless. So we can compare and contrast those different things in the books and see that the characters are similar. In Ballad, Snow's family feels he is entitled to be the president someday, and the Snow lands on top line that we see throughout the book, it is repeated, and Coriolanus Snow believes that. He believes that he is going to land on top no matter what, and he will do whatever it takes to get there. It doesn't always start that way, but we do see, even early into the book, on page 9, Snow lands on top. That is told to him by his cousin Tigress, which later I do think she regrets that in the further books. But we'll get to that eventually if we dive into the Hunger Games books. However, the very last line of the book is Snow lands on top. So it's a foreshadowing of what is to be. And today's t-shirt is The Tremendous Exterior, The Great Outdoors. I love that artist. I think it's Nathan Pyle that draws these. They're amazing, these little alien sayings on these t-shirts. Teaching in t-shirts, making formal learning more comfortable. Come back for more of The T-Shirt Teacher.